Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for today's webinar on using JIRA default workflows versus customized ones for QA testing. My name is Brent Jenkins, Marketing Manager here at Checkpoint Technologies, and I will be your moderator. Joining me today is Bob Cruz and Jim Intriglia. Let's start with you, Bob. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. We do appreciate it. So again, my name is Bob Cruz. I'm president and co-founder of Checkpoint Technologies. I've got a little over 29 years of experience in IT. Started off as an IBM DB2 COBOL programmer back in the good old mainframe days. And then about 15 years ago, really developed a passion for quality assurance, software testing, and then as well as I'm very passionate about DevOps and Internet of Things. So again, thank you for joining us. Jim?
Thanks, Bob. This is Jim Intriglia. I'm a solutions engineering consultant here at Checkpoint Technologies. I have over 25 years of experience developing scalable enterprise business platforms and application software for business and professional use. My JIRA practice goal is to work with business stakeholders, JIRA administrators, and end users to continuously improve strategies and methodologies that create scalable and maintainable production-grade enterprise JIRA platforms.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bob and Jim. So a little bit about us before we get started. Checkpoint Technologies provides expert services and best-of-breed software solutions for quality assurance and software testing, specifically when it comes to functional, performance, and application security testing. What we do is we enable organizations to deliver higher quality applications to market faster. We started in January of 2003, and our headquarters is located in sunny Tampa, Florida. We are an Atlassian Solutions partner, a Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Gold partner, as well as proud partners of Mobile Labs, Turnkey Solutions, and Zephyr. We are also a HPE authorized software support and certified training partner. Along with that, we're also affiliated with QAI Worldwide. QAI stands for Quality Assurance Institute. So if you ever need training courses on things like the essentials in software testing or agile test strategies or more, we can certainly provide that to you either here in our training center, remotely, or even at your organization. So as far as some of the professional services we provide, there's staff augmentation. So if you need some strong testing resources to be part of your team, long or short term, whether on-site or remote, we can certainly provide that to you. We also provide consulting, so anything from handling upgrades to installation configurations, test automation assessments, audits, and more. Next is our version of onshoring, where we can house a team for you right here in our headquarters in Tampa, Florida. And we also provide education, structured classroom training, or tailored mentoring, where we will actually go on site in your environment and educate your team how to use a solution where real work actually gets done. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. This is a live webinar, but it is being recorded. So everybody that has registered today will receive a link to that recording within 24 hours of the close of this webinar. And there will be a Q&A session at the end. So we encourage you to type questions at any point in time throughout the webinar. We may interject with some of those questions even. So we're using GoToWebinar, as you've probably already seen. So on your control panel, there should be a question section. Just type that question in, hit send, and hopefully we can get to it during Q&A. If we don't, we will definitely get to all questions in a follow-up email within a week of the webinar. So by the end of this webinar, you should know some of the pros and cons of using default or customized workflows in JIRA, ways to determine workflow needs, and one approach to a customized workflow for QA test needs and more. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Bob to kick off the presentation on using JIRA default workflows for customized versus customized workflows for QA testing. Take it away, Bob.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you very much. So as I'm sure everybody realizes in the audience, when it comes to quality assurance and software testing, they're very specific assets that, regardless of the SDLC, software development lifecycle model you may be using, all of these different assets apply to varying degrees. So releases and cycles, you've got requirements or perhaps user stories if you're agile, test cases, test scripts, test sets, test executions, test runs, and defects. So the thing that differs in each of the model is simply the speed with which you address an iteration, if you will, and how fast or how quickly you cycle through these different assets. So I just want to get down to basics for just a moment, make sure we're all on the same page. So one of the things Jim will be discussing in detail is he'll be using the term workflow quite a bit. So what is a workflow? Well, a workflow is a progression of steps. So it might be tasks, events, interactions, transitions, and they would comprise a work process of some sort. And that workflow creates or adds value to the process. And when you think about workflows, typically you're going to be referencing two different types. Might be a sequential workflow in which each step is dependent upon the occurrence of the previous step, or it might be a parallel workflow. So think of when you see in a workflow in a diagram, you see two different processes side by side, typically indicating that two or more steps can occur concurrently. So some examples might be if we were looking at a user story workflow. So you'll see in this diagram here, we visually represented this workflow, which shows that a product owner creates a user story in a status of new and with a default reason. Then the team updates the status to active once they've decided to complete the work during a sprint. That user story then gets moved to resolved when the team has completed all the associated task and unit test for the story pass. So obviously we've bolded all of the different statuses, if you will. That user story then gets moved to closed state when the product owner agrees that the story has been implemented according to acceptance criteria. Another example would be a defect workflow. So in my lifetime as a consultant, I've consulted for a little over 260 organizations, and I've seen numerous variations of a defect workflow. And this is a more basic one, if you will. But in this scenario, the defect gets identified. Perhaps it's by a service desk, perhaps it's by the software testing team, and the status automatically defaults to new. Then an individual or perhaps even a committee might review that defect and determine, you know what, this defect was reported in error. The tester was incorrect, perhaps the requirement or the functionality that they were validating is now obsolete. So the status of that defect would be set to reject and no longer worked. Otherwise, it's determined, yes, the defect was reported correctly. We're going to put this into a status of open. Once it's in open, then a developer or whomever it's assigned to will then start to work on that defect, obviously with the goal of resolving it. Now, they might determine, you know what, although this is a defect, we know for whatever reason we will not or cannot resolve the defect in this release, so we're going to set the status to defer and then resolve it in a future release or cycle, at which point we're going to set the status to fixed. Otherwise, when it's initially open, we determine, yeah, we need to resolve this now, we fix it, we set it to fixed, and that's the indication for the QA or the software testing team to retest that fix and verify whether or not it's truly been resolved. If the defect has not been resolved, we're going to set the status back to open. Otherwise, yes, perfect, it's been fixed. We're now going to set it to close. So those are just a couple of examples of workflows. So what is a JIRA workflow? So Atlassian defines a JIRA workflow as a set of statuses and transitions an issue moves through during its life cycle and typically represents processes within your organization. So very straightforward definition. So at this point in time, we're going to take a quick poll, And Jim and I this will help all of us just better determine the level of integration, if you will, that you all have with the Atlassian software.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So I'm launching the poll now. So the question is, regarding JIRA software, your organization has been using JIRA for a year or more, has just started using JIRA, has recently acquired JIRA and is looking to implement, is interested in using JIRA in the future, or there is no interest in JIRA at all. I just really love you guys' webinars. So I'm going to give the audience a minute or two to take that poll. We appreciate your feedback. All right, it looks like just about everybody in the audience has taken it. So, Bob, what do you think about these results?
So I see that 73% have been using JIRA for a year or more. Fantastic, we love it. And I want to emphasize to all of you on the call, by the way, please feel free to submit questions. And then it shows that 18% has just started using JIRA, 2% has recently acquired JIRA and is looking to implement it. And then only 7% is interested in using JIRA in the future. And although it says 0% on not interested in JIRA, I am very confident that all of you love our webinars.
Absolutely, Bob.
But you know, I guess the one thing that surprises me was, and I'm excited to see, is that such a large percentage have already been using JIRA for over a year. That's fantastic. Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Thanks, Bob and Brent. That 75% of you are already using JIRA, so a lot of what I'm about to say about best practices will resonate, and you'll nod your head, shaking, yeah, we kind of do that, and the other percentage of you will probably say, yeah, we probably should start doing that. So I think for 3/4 of the users, Bob and Brent, they're going to get some value out of the next segment of this presentation. And those of you just starting out, this will actually be fantastic because it'll give you some ideas as to best practices to ensure that your JIRA instance delivers values to your stakeholders and your users, and also that you don't have to rediscover the wheel as far as best practices. Great, thanks, Jim. So this is Jim Intriglia. To start, Bob provided an overview of a QA testing workflow. Ultimately, what happens with a JIRA instance, a JIRA project, is that over time it begins to either mimic the entire workflow as far as the JIRA workflow, which is actually an object. When we talk about a JIRA workflow, we're talking about one object that is a part of a JIRA project. So over time, that workflow tends to either completely mimic the QA test workflow, or mimic a portion of it. And what determines the extent really is up to the JIRA lead, the stakeholders involved, what they really want out of the tool as far as gaining significant value. So if we decide the JIRA administrator decides or makes the decision along with the stakeholders to basically make use of what we call it, or sometimes referred to as an out-of-box turnkey JIRA project, we're going, this is actually what would be displayed on the screen. We're going to focus on the basic software development project option, of which a basic workflow or a canned workflow is associated with. So once we select that option, what we're going to be working with is basically a JIRA basic workflow. And a basic workflow has 4 steps: to do, in progress, in review, and done. Pretty straightforward. As far as reporting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it gives you some capability to extract some information about what's happening with your issues and defects in QA. In addition, we also get some default issue types, such as bug, task, subtask, improvement, new feature, and epic. One thing that's important with launching or even developing a JIRA project is that everybody that is going to be using JIRA and depending on it for reporting is on the same page. So one of the key things we want to do when we launch a JIRA default project is agree on we're going to use the bug issue type to report, to log and report defects rather than task or subtask. If users are not provided that guidance, they won't really, and we might expect they would use the bug, but I've seen even QA testers open something up as a task, and then all of a sudden our reports that we create based on the bug type, issue type, suddenly don't show things that we would expect to show up. So a little orientation is always a good thing when it comes to, even if your JIRA instance is underway, it never hurts to provide some orientation and guidance to your users and your stakeholders of what the intended uses are for issue types, and also what each of the workflow steps mean. With the basic workflow, it's pretty obvious as far as to do, in progress, review, and done as to what the nature of each of a bug in one of those states will be. So what we see here is an example of what could be a second iteration of the basic workflow, where, and many of you, since 3/4 of you are already using JIRA, you've likely done this as well, where you work with the basic workflow for a while and then soon discover that, gee, we need a little bit more context, or not so much context, we need a little bit more, a few more steps like resolved and closed, and oh, you know, we really need to a reopen step because, gee, that defect that we thought was fixed, it turns out it wasn't fixed the way we thought it would be fixed, and now we can't really reopen an issue, we have to create a new one. So this particular workflow solves that by adding a reopen workflow step so that resolved issues or closed issues, depending on how you configure it, can be reopened and reused. You don't have to waste time re-entering all the information. An additional thing with this expanded workflow is that it also has several transitions that gives more flexibility to the workflow as compared to the default workflow. So what are some of the pros and cons associated with going with a default workflow or an expanded customized workflow? Well, on the pro side, we basically have added granularity when we have more workflow steps, and we have the option of using better labels, like statuses is what I'm referring to, which really come into play when we bring a bug ticket up, so to speak. When I say ticket, I'm talking about a JIRA record. In that when we're looking at the ticket, if it says pending QA test, we know that the issue has apparently been resolved by by development, and we're waiting for QA to test it, rather than in progress, which really doesn't give us any kind of context as to what's happening with that ticket. The downside with that approach, with sticking on the con side with a default JIRA workflow, is that when you have a status of in process, users tend to have to go through comments and really examine attachments to try to figure out what's happening with this issue, and that's what we want to get away from, and that's one of the benefits of going with a more customized JIRA workflow. So this particular slide really brings to the surface why what we're looking at here is we're creating a search filter, and dashboards are also driven by search filters, and search filters also serve as the basis for basic reports, which is basically going to tell us what's happening with our particular QA test process on a particular software deliverable. So as you can see on the right-hand side, the search dialog, there's a type all. The type all, if we were to click on that drop-down, we would have bug, task, subtask. So if we have all of our users on the same page as far as, hey, defects get entered with the bug issue type, then we can expect to see all of our issues represented in a search filter, as compared if somebody kind of went off the script and entered a bug as a task. That's not going to show up in a filter where we select the status as a bug. The other thing is that, the issue type is a bug. The status is where, when we click on the status dropdown, that's where we see the statuses associated with each of the workflow steps. And you can see here, we basically have only 4 options to work with: in progress, to do, done, and in review. So basically, the nature of our dashboards and reports will only reflect QA issues that are in progress to do, done, and in review. Doesn't really tell us much. We got to maybe drill down, do a lot more work to determine what's going on with a particular issue that we're interested in. This is an actual example of a JIRA workflow that was developed by a QA team. And as you can see, it has multiple steps, multiple workflow steps, and very clear statuses. For example, deployed to test, ready for QA. The benefit of that is that when we have a particular issue up in JIRA and we see ready for QA, well, that's pretty obvious as to where that issue is. And when we look at our transition and it says send to QA, well, that's pretty obvious what the next step is for that issue. So that's the way, ideally, that's kind of the holy grail of JIRA development. It's much like the Apple iPhone. You notice when you get your iPhone, there's no instruction book. You don't need one. It's intuitive. That's the goal, what we want to have with customized expanded workflows. When we look at an issue, it should be intuitive to the team and even stakeholders, maybe that don't know the QA process that well. When they drill down to an issue, what the status is with that issue, what the next steps are to resolve that issue, just by looking at the record and the statuses. And that will also, and here's the key point, carry on to filters and dashboards, because now we have more information and more context level information represented at the status level as well as the workflow steps. So custom QA workflow pros and cons. With a customized workflow, over time, one of the benefits is that it's going to closely mimic the QA test workflow, 2 words, the business process. That's a good thing, because when people go from a meeting or talking about a particular issue, or even broadly about where a software deliverable is in the QA test process, and then they go to JIRA, there's going to be very little that they have to transition to in their mindset as far as differences in workflow. If you stick with a default workflow, there's going to have to be not only some translation, there's really not much context in progress, even though you can go back and forth and chat and ask questions and make phone calls. You really don't want to have everybody investing time doing that. It's much, much to your advantage to have them look at a particular issue or a dashboard and know what the situation is, and to have that to agree with basically the information that comes out of the test department.
So Jim, it really looks like basically what you're saying here is that the only real con, or the cons, in regard to utilizing a custom QA workflow all revolve around level of effort to implement and maintain that custom QA workflow. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And you know, there's no right or wrong way to do it. I've done my own projects and projects for other organizations both ways. It really depends on, here's the key thing, what do your project leads, your business sponsors, your senior managers expect out of this thing when it goes live. If you have sponsors and even power users and supervisors that will not suffer in iteration, you really want to do some homework up front and go with a customized workflow, so when that JIRA project goes into production, they are getting exactly what they expect out of that. So that's one of the key questions, Bob, to ask.
Fantastic. And we do have an excellent question here from the audience that I'd like to throw out to you, Jim. What's most common, to have a standard project setup or to build a more flexible model to have projects configure their projects differently?
I've seen it both ways. We actually configured JIRA. We had a bunch of users that basically, for years, all they really needed was a basic workflow. And we configured JIRA in such a way that very rapidly we could add them to a particular predefined project, and they would come up live within a day.
Okay.
For our other users, we would go with a custom workflow, custom project, in fact, where they had very specific needs.
So there are really a lot of different factors you'd want to look at before making a determination that that's right or that's wrong, relative to best practices, size of team, et cetera, right?
And expectations.
Okay.
I think the thing, Bob, that really saved us, because we really didn't know as a team what to make of JIRA when we saw it, is being software developers and test engineers. And we said, gee, this looks awfully like an application. Let's treat a JIRA project like an application and apply SDLC, Agile, the whole mindset to developing a JIRA project and a workflow, and it saved us a lot of time and effort because that's basically what a JIRA project is. It's a little mini application.
All right, fantastic. Great. Thanks, Jim.
So this particular table, again, we're with that customized QA workflow, QA test workflow. This table, one thing you'll see, I use visuals a lot. Some people are visual communicators. A visual diagram will mean a lot to them, where the right-hand side, the text-based column thing, won't mean anything to them. They won't get it. So I recommend when you're training users or even when you're doing requirements, represent the workflow both ways. Represent it as you see it left. And this comes in JIRA, by the way. This is really no additional work. On the right-hand side, of course, I have a little bit more detail. Now let's just dive into that for a second. On the right-hand, the JIRA workflow on the left basically comes right out of the tool, which is fantastic. On the right, I just created a very simple table that provides a little but important context. And this is also can be used as a reference for training. For example, if we look at the third step, workflow step down in development, the workflow step status is fixed in progress. Well, that's a pretty definitive, that tells exactly what's going on with that particular issue, that the developers are working on a fix to a reported defect. The context summary column for that particular in development workflow step says, developer is actively working on correcting a reported issue. That pretty much leaves nothing to imagination. Now, while this may seem minor, I've seen a lot of confusion and a lot of delays. And as a JIRA admin, I've had a lot of users walk back to me and say, what does it mean when something is in a particular step? By creating this kind of an aid, not only can you have a little handy-dandy reference guide, but it can also serve as orientation and training. Now, ideally, if you do if you give good thought to your statuses and your transitions, which is what the user is going to interpret as far as where a defect is and what the next steps are for that defect, you will probably never need anything like on the right-hand side, but it's still a good planning tool.
So, Jim, let me interrupt you real quick because we actually have another great question that just came in that I wanted to throw out at you. Is there any additional work to migrating a custom workflow to a new version of JIRA?
To a new version of JIRA. So if I understand the question, we have a particular customized workflow and a new release of JIRA comes out? Is that the
Yes.
question? Okay, that all depends on what the release is. Assuming that you're staying current with your JIRA releases and you don't go any more than a major dot release, so we're at 7.3 server now, let's assume that you're at 7.2 and 7.3 comes up. There usually should, depending on what the change in my experience, there usually hasn't been any issue with workflows being migrated over to the new release. You should have a formalized process for that. When release notes come out, especially if the thing is mission critical in production, somebody should be looking at the release notes and seeing if there have been any changes made to the workflow that can cause an issue for migrating old to new.
Yeah, and along with that, Jim, if I'm correct, you can actually import existing workflows from outside of your JIRA as well.
That's actually a great point, Brent. That's a fantastic point. When you actually within JIRA itself, much in the marketplace, you can take a look at QA workflows, HR workflows, and see if they meet your needs. Why recreate the wheel unless you have to? And that might be a fantastic approach rather than starting from scratch.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim.
So two great moral of the stories there. One is stay current on your patches, don't fall behind, and the other one is don't reinvent the wheel.
That's right.
All right.
That's right. This is a really key slide, and 3/4 of you out there have probably already crossed this bridge and learned this lesson. It really, 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 really pays to talk to your senior managers that are going to be looking at JIRA and pulling information out to report up. Your project leads that are responsible for changes for managing requirements as far as what the JIRA project and workflow should do. Ask these guys, so what kind of reports do you want out of JIRA? Because that will drive your workflow design. That will also drive what custom fields to create. It's really a pain in the neck when you discover 3 months into a project that a manager really needed to track wanted a particular level of granularity in the workflow in other words, an additional workflow step or steps, to get some information out. And on top of that, they need information, a particular piece of information to be reported, which basically nobody identified as needing to be entered. So all of a sudden, you got a bit of a crisis in that not only is your project and workflow not configured correctly, you're not even collecting the, collecting the data that's needed for the report. So it'll save you a ton of time, and this was a best practice in the place where I did administration for 5 years or so. Get the senior stakeholders together. Anybody who has a key dependency on that JIRA project, get your JIRA admin in, JIRA lead person that represents changes to that project, get them talking. It only takes about an hour, and ask them, so what kind of reports and dashboards do you guys need to see to report up? And if they don't know, that's okay. Have them figure it out and come back to you before you start making decisions on any kind of a workflow or custom field data element screens, etc. So what we're looking at here is really a snippet of a visual workflow specification that we developed over the course of 5 years. Now, in 25 years of being a software developer and a technical writer and a business analyst, 2 or 3 of those things love documentation. I've come to really look at documentation with a jaundiced eye because somebody has to maintain it, and it always seems to get out of date. So after doing JIRA development for many years and having all these wonderful documents, and we had about 6 or 7 of them that fully documented our JIRA projects, we sat back and said we need to cut this down significantly. And what we ended up coming with, which worked great for many years, is a very simple Visio diagram, which I'll explain in a minute. That's what we're looking at here, a snippet diagram, and an Excel spreadsheet to gather requirements on data elements and screens. And that's all we needed to not only gather requirements for a customized project, but literally use for training and also additions, or I should say updates to workflows. So let me circle back and take a look at this, this little snippet here. This is represents a research and development workflow. It's customized. And you see V1.2, so versioning, again, much like we treat it like a piece of software, this is version 1.2 of a production workflow. The beauty of this diagram is that I can literally give this to a JIRA administrator, and with no questions asked, he can build the whole workflow and project. This is not just about the workflow. For example, if we start at the left-hand side, you see the little icon that says reporter. Well, that's the person that's going to create the ticket. Pretty straightforward. Under it is a little icon of an email, and it says created. That's the action. So when we create a ticket, watchers, reporters, and the current assignees are going to get an email notification. That tells the JIRA administrator how to configure notifications. Continuing to the right, we see a little icon that says create. That's a screen. That tells the JIRA administrator we need a screen here. Now, all this information came when we met with users and said, well, do you want a screen? Who do you want to be able to do this to create tickets? Is it going to be a single reporter or a group of reporter? The first step says research and development epic project or task is ready. That's the state that the ticket is in when it's created. And notice the status of backlog. So when the ticket is created, it is automatically put into the backlog for this particular project. Notice to the right, we have program owners, team project managers. That's talking about the permission scheme. That tells the JIRA administrator you need 2 groups or roles. You can go both ways. We tended to like to use groups at the time. A project owners group, a team project managers group. And it begs the second question, who are the members that go in both of those groups? That can be discussed in the meeting. That can even be put, again, in a separate document. It can just be put and noted right on the same Visio diagram. And on, the last symbol on that is, again, we covered that, an email icon that basically says watchers and reporters and current assignees will get an email notification when we transition to assigned team member. So when we actually assign that ticket to a team member, we will transition, we will send an email notification out. So this is actually the legend that appears on the diagram, and this is what makes it an easy training aid. And it goes into more detail as far as if we look at the first one. I won't go through all of them for the sake of time, so we have more time for Q&A. But under the created, the top left, the notifications created, the event description says when workflow transitions, a created notification email will be sent to watchers, the reporter, and the current assignee. So it provides some context into what the diagram means, and this is what makes it a training aid. Don't be surprised if you go this route to see these diagrams hung over your users' desks and your testers' desks, because they're a great reference tool. So being agile, I mentioned treating JIRA projects as software. Adopting an agile mindset and even applying a Scrum approach. Your workflows, I would consider updating on a monthly basis. Your JIRA administrator, your JIRA project lead for your QA project should be asking what significant improvements and changes can be made to this workflow to deliver significant value to stakeholders and users, and making note of that. The process for upgrading a workflow should be easy. I've had users take my visual diagram, draw some lines on it, and drop it on my desk, and that's all they needed to update the workflow. I've also seen projects where they absolutely do not want to stray from the default workflow, and that tends really not to serve the project very well. So be very careful in being too rigid with workflow or project modifications. That's the whole reason, that's the power of JIRA, is you can customize it to the nth degree to fit your process and deliver true value. The other thing I'll bring up, and also workflows can be treated as sprints. As part of a sprint, you can have updates to the workflow, to your custom fields, any kind of an object. So you can actually handle this with respect to Scrum planning and backlogs, talk about what's really critical, what can be done in future updates, etc. So key principles, JIRA Agile Workflow Management. Iterative workflow upgrades enables QA to plan and adapt to changing test requirements. Things change in the business of QA testing. There may be priorities that come up. There may be long-term changes that come up that affect the QA test workflow. Those changes should also be mimicked in JIRA. Otherwise, you don't want to have your JIRA workflow out of sync significantly with your QA test workflow. Again, the workflow development process should be flexible to meet the needs of the stakeholders. Sometimes, with production instances, you run into configuration management. It's important really to, especially configuration managers, to make them understand that, it needs to be flexible, and the tool is only valuable if it can be easily updated to reflect the needs of team members and stakeholders. The other thing, too, on the slide is know what success means. So if you're planning a bunch of changes to a JIRA project as part of a sprint, define what the success of that sprint is. If there are significant changes in the workflow, who is going to determine if those changes are successful when you do the cutover to the new workflow, and as well as report it, right? You don't want to be making changes and then wondering, has anybody tested it? Was the sprint successful? Those things should be identified as part of each sprint release. So what we learned today is some of the pros and cons of using a default JIRA workflow out of the box for the basic software development project. We talked about the benefits of an expanded workflow and some of the things we should be doing as a precursor to doing any kind of development work, workflow or otherwise. Ask questions of your stakeholders and your key users that are going to be depending on JIRA. We talked about how reports and dashboards drive JIRA development, and as such, we should be asking questions of our team members and our stakeholders as to what reports and dashboards they need and what needs to be represented as far as data elements on those reports and dashboards. We also talked about the visual approach using Visio. You can also use the Web App Lucid chart, which is a very reasonable reasonably cost application on the web if you don't have Visio. And also we talked about how to treat a JIRA project development agilely to apply the same principles with Agile to a JIRA project as well as Scrum with iterations and repetitive improvements on a JIRA project and workflow.
Great, thanks, Jim. So we actually had some great questions coming in, so I'm going to throw them out your way. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we have time for just a handful of them.
So Brent, just very quickly, I mean, as I've been monitoring the questions as well, I just wanted to share with everybody, one of the common themes around several questions is in regard to JIRA integration with some of the other great test management solutions out there. And as many of you know, we are a long-time HP Enterprise partner. We have considerable expertise in ALM and Quality Center. And we also have quite a bit of expertise in the Zephyr solutions, as well as QA Symphony and Ranorex. So one of the things we do plan is a future webinar in which we will be focusing on JIRA integrations with these third-party solutions, with these other solutions. So we didn't address that here, but great questions, and we do plan that for a future webinar, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for that.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob. That's a great point. Okay, so here's a great question. If you can customize JIRA specifically for a QA team, couldn't you do the same for any type of business team?
Absolutely. And that was why back in November, I think 2015, Atlassian introduced JIRA Core. Half of my 15 or 20 projects at a former employer were business projects. JIRA Core is designed for business. You can certainly use your JIRA server instance for business as well. So absolutely, yes, you can.
Great. Next question, does JIRA have any other default workflows available other than what comes with the default projects?
Yes, I think, Brent, you brought this up in the Atlassian marketplace. Mm-hmm. There are other workflows like for HR and probably QA tests, that's, you name it, that can be downloaded and used as part of a project. Those of you that are familiar with building projects from scratch will know how to take that workflow and integrate it into an existing project or build a project around a workflow that has been downloaded from the marketplace.
Great. Well, here's a great question. If we wanted to create a custom workflow for our team but don't have any experienced JIRA admin, what should we do?
That's one of the services we can provide. Okay, because you know I've been down that path, and it's very wise to get some help. JIRA does have a significant learning curve, and part of the reason for that is it's so customizable. So I would definitely talk to us further about getting some coaching and some mentoring, so you get started on the right foot and you don't waste a lot of time. Experimenting with JIRA is not something you want to do.
Yeah. All right, great. Okay, here's another great question. When creating a custom workflow, what is the order of configuration, or is there?
That is a great question, and I actually asked that about a year ago to an Atlassian. He's actually the product manager for Atlassian. He laughed and he said, you know, we really haven't written anything about that. And those of us that are experienced JIRA administrators, we know what the process is, and some of us might have jotted it down. But few of us have ever written about it. I actually am planning to write a little quick article on how to do that. The reason it's needed is that even for experienced JIRA administrators, it does make sense to have that process down, because JIRA does have a few blind alleys that you can go down where you can configure components, and if you bind them in the wrong, in a certain way that looks perfectly valid, the project doesn't work. So that's a great question. I haven't found anything. I did a search a week or two ago on Atlassian's site where they've actually addressed that, but I can definitely put something together quickly if you want to know how I do it. And there are probably several ways to do it that are valid as well.
Great. Here's another question. Does JIRA support two-way integration to HPE ALM?
So I'll field that one, Jim. It absolutely does. It's a synchronization, and I don't want to say that it's real time, but you can create the minimum cycle time to be very, very low so that it's almost real time. So hopefully that answers that question. You know, I know some of the other solutions do have some two-way as well as real time. So hopefully I answered that question. If you'd like any more details on that, please let us know.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob. Okay, just for time purposes, I'm going to ask one more. We've got some really great questions coming in, so we will be getting to everybody's question in a follow-up email, so no worries there. Last one here, can you create a project template with custom workflows? So when creating a project, it lets you select those defaults. So I think the question here is can you not only create a custom workflow, but a custom project template that assigns that workflow to it?
Yeah, I don't know that I would call it a template. We would create a project and clone it, so we wouldn't have to create it from scratch. I don't know if that's inherent in the tool, in the current version of Server. I don't believe it is, but I'd have to look into that some more. That's a great idea. That would be a great feature.
And on all of these questions, everybody, we will be going through all questions submitted, even if we didn't answer them, and answering them, and then sending the questions out to all of you that were kind enough to attend our webinar today. And we should be able to get those out to you within the next, give us some time if you would, but within the next 2 weeks.
Great. So before we close out today, I just wanted to mention a few of Checkpoint Technologies' upcoming events. First off, we will be at the STPCon Expo in Phoenix, Arizona next week, actually, March 14th through the 17th. As well as while we're there, we're giving 2 presentations at the conference. One titled Test Automation in a Left Shifting World, as well as the Internet of Things Exciting Impact on Testing, which is actually given by Bob Cruz, one of our presenters today. Our next webinar will be on March 30th, discussing what's new in UFT 14, and that'll be with our Director of Professional Services, Dean Carvin, along with guest speaker Joe Colantonio. After that, we will be at the QAI Quest Conference in Chicago, April 3rd through the 7th. Once again, Bob will be presenting on the Internet of Things, as well as our Director of Client Management, Paul Shovlin, will be presenting on 10 best practices that performance testing experts follow.
And Brent, real quick, at that Quest conference, I'm also going to be teaching a 2-day software testing course, and more specifically, it's actually the QAI CSTE prep course.
That's right, and that's a 2-day course,
correct? That's a 2-day course.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob. So I wanted to invite the audience to reach out to us with any other questions you may have. That's why I have our contact information up on the screen, or anything your organization may need assistance with. I do encourage everyone here to take the very short survey at the end of this webinar, letting us know how we did. Your feedback means a lot to us. So with that, on behalf of myself, Bob and Jim, and everyone else here at Checkpoint Technologies, we really hope you enjoyed our webinar and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.